Good morning. Mr. Herman here with our 4.2 video on key features from graphs. So last video, we looked at tables of quadratic functions. Now we're going to start looking at graphs of quadratic functions. As we saw in class the other day, we call these graphs parabolas. And some of these vocab words that we've seen, or that we're going to see, we've seen before. However, there are some that are going to be a bit new to us. So without further ado, let's go and get started with these vocabulary terms. So we've seen maximum before, but we're going to take it from the definition of on a graph. Okay, so the maximum is the highest y value on a graph. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and draw a picture, and we're going to call that a max. All right, now the minimum is the lowest y value on a graph. We're going to call that a min. Just as a reminder, make sure that you're giving your maximum and minimum as an ordered parent, x comma y. So when we look for our x-intercepts, it's where the graph crosses the x-axis. So if we draw an axis there, we have x-intercept and x-intercept. Okay? Now for our y-intercept then, it's going to be where the graph crosses the y-axis. And then we'll draw another picture here. And then there's our y-intercept. Okay, so these four terms we saw on Monday when we looked at our key features from tables, and now we're just seeing them on graphs. These should all be review for us. Now, we're going to take a look at our domain and range. So these can be a bit tricky, but we have seen these before. So domain is all possible x values, okay? And we want to make sure we consider those from left to right. So just like we're reading a book, that's how we read a graph. Okay, so let's take a look here. We'll draw a little picture. So if we draw our graph here, okay, so our domain is our x values. Now since there's arrows on the end, I put arrows on the end there. And so here is our domain. It goes on forever. Now our range is going to be all possible y values. So just like we read from left to right, with our range though, we go from bottom to top. And we'll go ahead and draw a picture. So we've got the top of our curve going down. We've got arrows, so I'm going to go down there, and there's my range. Okay, now we'll talk about notation in a few minutes, but we want to make sure we know what to look for on our graph. Okay, but notice how in the top of my range, I just have a solid line because it only peaks there. It doesn't have an arrow going up. Now, our interval of increase is from left to right, just like we read a book, to right. When is the graph going up? Okay, so let's go ahead and draw another picture. All about the pictures. Okay, so I go left to right. I start on the left, My graph's going down, down, down. Okay, it starts going up. So I'm going to draw a line here. It's going up. It keeps going up forever with an arrow. Okay, there's my interval of increase. Now our interval of decrease from left to right, when is the graph going down? Okay, so let's draw another picture. So now I start on the left side. It's going down. I know the arrow is pointing up, but this graph is going down. And since it has an arrow on that end, I need to draw an arrow on that end. Now it's going down, it's going down, it's going down. It stops going down. And now it's going to start going back up again. Okay, and that's our interval of decrease. Once again, we'll look at notation on those in just a little bit. Okay, and now our last term is the axis of symmetry. So the axis of symmetry is where the parabola is cut in half. Okay, we'll talk about how to find that in just a minute. Let's go and draw a graph here. So there's our curve, and our axis of symmetry is just right down the middle, cutting that in half. And that's going to be written as x equals h. And we'll talk more about that on Friday. Okay, so here's our vocabulary. Now we're going to go ahead and talk a bit more about domain and range, intervals of increase, decrease, and axis of symmetry, because those are a bit newer or more challenging, and then we'll go ahead and put it all together. All right, so let's focus on our domain and range first. So our domain is x values, okay? So with our x values, we want to think left and right. So I always go from left to right. So let's draw a little mark where our graph stops, okay? Now it has an arrow on the end going towards the left. So I need to draw an arrow here, going towards the left like my graph says. Now I'm going to read from left to right. So I know I have my graph happens, it's still happening, and now my arrow hits, my graph stops, but since I have an arrow, I want to keep going to the right. Okay, so I look at my domain here, and it says it's going all the way to the left, which is negative infinity, and it's going all the way to the right, positive infinity. Whenever I see infinity, I always want to use parentheses. Now let's look at our domain, or our range rather. So start at the bottom. So here's the bottom. There's no arrows at the bottom, so I just have a straight line. Now my function's going, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up. It stops going up, but I have an arrow. So we need an arrow on the top. Okay, now when we talk about range, we always talk about going from bottom to top. We talk about y value. So my y value here is 1. And then the top, it's an arrow, so it's going up. So that's positive infinity. Infinity always gives me a parenthesis. Since I've got a straight line right here, I'm going to have a bracket. Okay. Now, let's take a look at our intervals of increase and decrease. The same idea there. We're going to look at some of our arrows here. Okay, so I'm going to start from the left side of my graph. Now, these are only going to be x values. Interval of increase, decrease are my x values. All right, so I look at my left side, and I see there's an arrow. So let me draw an arrow going to the left. Now my function is, reading from left to right, it is decreasing. Decreasing, 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 stop. So let me show where it's decreasing. It's decreasing until I get to here. Draw a straight line. Okay, now my function is going up to the right. So draw a straight line. It's going up, 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 up. I get an arrow. And then I'm going to, since it stops, I'll draw a straight line. And then an arrow because it has an arrow on the end here. Now let's make these into intervals. Okay, So for my orange, for interval of decrease, that arrow is going to the left, so that's negative infinity. On the right, it stops at 3. Okay? For my green part, for interval of increase, it starts increasing at 3. And it goes, and I have an arrow going to the right, so that's going to be positive infinity. And now let's look at our axis of symmetry. So our axis of symmetry is going to cut the parabola in half. So notice how there's my middle. And the middle is where it goes from decreasing to increasing. Okay, so my axis of symmetry is x equals 3. It's going to be my splitting my intervals of increase and decrease together. Okay, so my axis of symmetry falls between my interval of increase and my interval of decrease. So I know that's a lot of information, and now we're going to kind of go through these right here. We'll do the first one together, and then I'll kind of have you work on the second one by using what we see on the first one. So let's go ahead and put it together. We have this graph here on the left. All right, so I'll work here through this one with our colors on it, and then I'll just kind of go through the answers on the second one. So for our domain is our x value, so we want to start at the left-hand side. Okay, there's my end of my graph, but I have an arrow going to the left. My graph is going on, it's going on, it's going on, it's going on, it stops, but there's an arrow. Okay, so arrow to the left is negative infinity. All the way to the right is an arrow, so positive infinity. Let's look at our range. From the bottom, I draw a straight line. It's going to go up, 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 and stops, but it keeps going with the arrow, so I need an arrow on there. Start with my bottom part first. The lowest y value is negative 3. My top is an arrow, so that's going to be positive infinity. Now we look at our interval of increase and decrease. So it starts off by decreasing. Okay, I have an arrow here. It's decreasing, 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 stop. So that's negative infinity, comma 3, or comma negative 2. Okay, let's scribble that out, negative 2. Okay, now let's look at the other side. It starts increasing at negative 2, and it increases, 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 stops, but there's an arrow, so it's going to go up forever. So I have negative 2 is where it starts increasing, and it goes all the way up to infinity. Okay, now we're throwing it back to our x-intercepts, y-intercepts, max, min, axis of symmetry, those sorts of things. Okay, so let's look at our x-intercepts. So where we cross the x-axis, so x-axis is there and there, so that's going to be 4.5 or negative 4.5 comma 0, and then over here we have 0.5 comma 0. Our y-intercept on the y-axis is right here, 0 comma negative 1. Okay, let's find the minimum. Okay, starting running out of colors here. Kind of already have. So our minimum is our lowest point. There's our lowest point here. Okay, and that's going to be negative 2 comma negative 3. So negative 2 comma negative 3. Okay, now if we look at our graph here, we look at the top, it keeps going on forever and ever. We got arrows at the top, so there is no maximum. Okay, so we'll go with none. Okay, now we're looking for the axis of symmetry. Now it cuts our parabola in half. Notice how our interval of increase and decrease is at -2. So that's what our axis of symmetry is going to be. X equals -2. Okay, so I'm going to have you go ahead and answer the next, the second graph here, this one here on the right side, with the key features, and then we'll go over them and check your work. All right, so we're going to go through these kind of quickly, because I know this video is getting a bit long, and I don't want to go too long. Let's look at domain. Our domain here is going to be -infinity, infinity. I'll make sure that there are some arrows on our parabola. Our range, our highest point is 2, but since that's our highest point, we start from low, which is -infinity, and we go all the way up to 2 for our range. Our interval of increase, we're going up the graph, up, 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 up. We stop going up when x is 0. So it's going to be -infinity, 0. Interval of decrease then starts at 0 and goes down, down, down as far as we can. So to +infinity. Our x-intercepts, we cross the x-axis there and there. So that's going to be -2, 0, and then 2, 0. Our y-intercept, we cross the y-axis there at 0, 2. Our minimum, we don't have a minimum. We've got arrows going down. Oh, sorry about that. Our minimum, we have none. Our maximum, though, we've got a maximum right here at the top. So that is going to be 0, 2. And then last but not least, our axis of symmetry. Cut that parabola in half. We know it's going to be the same value as our interval of increase and decrease split. So that's going to be x equals 0. Okay, so you got a homework problem that's going to have you do some of those on your own so that we can check those in class. But make sure you talk to your teacher if you have any questions about our key features of graphs.